Hi there, everyone. I'm Jordan Bateman, Vice President of Communications and Marketing for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, and this is the BC Poly Hot Stove. Joined as always... Hashtag. Joined as always by, I'm trying to point towards him, like the Brady Bunch.
I just see you, so to me, you're just sort of pointing to your right.
This show would be so much better if everyone just saw me, let me tell you. That's good.
My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I am live from the lovely, soon-to-be-condemned legislature in Victoria.
Yeah, the House of Commons, they're going to take 10 years to rebuild a portion of it or renovate it. Can you imagine? I guess it would be similar for the legislature.
I think it would be almost exactly the same. It would be sort of unimaginably long. It's the building would not be built. It's not up to code, basically. Yeah. And it would take forever to redo.
Yeah. So that's always great. And of course, no government will ever touch it because you just can't do it. No. Anyways, we are not here to talk about building permits for the Legislative Assembly. We're here to talk about the mother of all by-elections. Nanaimo came and went, and Maclean, I mean, no surprise, NDP stronghold. I predicted that the craziest thing that could happen would happen. That did not happen. However, basically, we wake up today status quo.
Yeah, I think this is, as Keith Baldry pointed out last night, that the last 16 elections in Nanaimo, the NDP have won 14 of them. So, I mean, should we be surprised? No, of course not. Their voters were very motivated to turn out because, I mean, the stakes could not conceivably be higher. And so here we are. We're sort of right back to where we started.
Yeah, so we'll talk winners and losers. There's no doubt the big winner was the NDP. Sheila Malcolmson moved Leonard Krog's vote up from a 46.5-point share in 2017 to 49, so a gain of 2.5 percentage points. Fair, good campaign. John Horgan was all over the place. I mean, they didn't take it for granted, unlike most of the time with what they do with the Nanaimo riding.
Horgan was up there every weekend campaigning, and he is a very good door-to-door campaigner. Let's give the man credit where it's due. The NDP had their provincial council there mid-campaign, which meant that literally every NDP MLA and staff member and activist was up there, and I'm sure probably did some door knocking and phone calling and stuff like that. I'm sure there wasn't a single NDP couch in Nanaimo that wasn't unoccupied that weekend. And hey, as Mike McDonald pointed out last night on Global, it's one thing for a government to win a by-election. It's another thing for a government to actually increase its vote share in a by-election. So, I mean, there's an accomplishment there.
Yeah, Mike McDonald, we can have a long conversation about his weird Nanaimo fixations. But, it was impressive. The other thing that we should mention, Dogwood Initiative, Lead Now, these U.S.-funded professional protest groups, eco-activists, and apparently Democratic reform activists, they were very active in the riding. We know this because they were sending out fundraising emails, trying to raise more money than they could actually legally spend in that riding, which will be an interesting question for Elections BC to parse in a few weeks. And then, the unions. CUPE was everywhere, Unifor was everywhere. The traditional NDP bastion of support. It's a little bit like, if you're in the Lower Mainland, think New Westminster. That's a little bit like Nanaimo, a union on every corner. It's just
that's a good comparison, actually.
Yeah, it's just sort of the way it is, and they won, and they carry on now. I don't think it was a resounding approval of their particular agenda. However, they do get to carry on governing as long as Andrew Weaver, I suppose, lets them. I'm not sure. We'll come to Andrew Weaver in a second. I would submit, though, that if you told the BC Liberals at the beginning, the day after the election in 2017, that the next time Nanaimo riding voted, you would move up from 32.5%, so less than a third of the popular vote, to over 40%, I'd submit that they would be pretty darn happy with that.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think you and I discussed this before Christmas, saying that Wilkinson doesn't need to win Nanaimo because it might be too steep a hill to climb. But if he does well there, it's going to reflect well on how he's doing. And it may have felt like the goalposts moved after such a resounding victory in the proportional representation referendum. But in the end, we kind of got exactly what a lot of people thought we would, which is that a very credible showing for what I thought was a pretty solid candidate in Tony Harris and the BC Liberal team in Nanaimo. Obviously they wanted to win. Let's not underscore that, or not underscore underscore that. But I mean, it's not like they didn't run a good campaign, and it's not like they didn't increase their vote share pretty substantially.
Yeah. They shaved 6.5 points off the NDP win from 2017. Now, and plus they get to test out their election machinery. Wilkinson got to get a little taste of what it will be like in a general election. They started to play around with their messaging a bit. We've been talking, you and I offline this morning, about the poll the Orca did that showed that the NDP had a 4-point lead within the margin of error, but certainly clearly an NDP lead. They stretched that to 8 points. I think it's mainly because of the Byelections report. The Byelections report blew up last week. Certainly the BC Liberals seem to be getting tagged with more of the blame for that than even the two guys who did it. I'm not sure how that works. But it does give Wilkinson and Wilkinson's team a little glimpse into how the NDP will campaign against them. And the NDP are pretty clear. They don't want to talk about their own record. They're going to talk about the BC Liberals' record from the 16 years previous to 2017.
Well, I mean, why would they want to talk about things like the speculation tax and the employer's health tax and things like that? I mean, yes, they were only too happy to tout a new emergency care unit in Nanaimo, which was announced just right around the time the by-election was called. I'm sure just a coincidence. But no, it's always easy for a governing party to point to what the previous one did. Hey, it's all their fault. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Yeah.
Look, so there were some big losers. Main Street will come to them. They were probably the biggest loser.
Yeah.
Let's start with the BC Conservatives. Get them out of the way, much like the voters of Nanaimo did. The BC Conservatives rolled into town and picked up a whopping 2% of the vote there in Nanaimo. So.
Yikes. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously one of the things I wrote yesterday is that the only way the BC Conservatives are going to insert themselves into the media today is if somehow magically their vote is the difference between a BC Liberal win and a BC Liberal loss. That did not happen. The BC Conservatives were not a factor. Again, it's difficult to read too much into a single by-election, but I mean, look, the BC Liberal Party, whatever the name is, has been pretty well accepted as a coalition of Canada's two biggest parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. And the BC Conservatives, as I wrote yesterday, again, sort of their sole raison d'etre seems to be to play spoiler. And so, I mean, if you're a free enterprise person, then voting for the BC Conservatives is at best counterproductive.
Yeah, my gut says that we've seen peak BC Conservative in the last election where they cost the Liberals the government. They cost them Courtney Comox, and they cost them Mark Dalton's riding in Maple Ridge. So I just don't see that happening again. I think the old W.A.C. Bennett witticism that every once in a while, every generation, British Columbians need to touch the hot stove of NDP socialism to remind themselves of how painful it is. I think that most free enterprisers in British Columbia have touched the hot stove here the past 18 months and are saying, oh my God, we got to get behind whoever the lead dog is as far as defeating the NDP, and that, of course, is the BC Liberals. So the Conservatives, I think, go back to probably where they belong, obscurity.
We should note the BC Conservatives did have their moment of glory last night. So I didn't see this because I was watching BC One, but apparently on the National, on CBC, they, and I even have a screenshot of it, which will not show up at all here. Well, maybe it will.
Whoa.
Anyway, the National had Justin Greenwood of the BC Conservatives taking 41% of the vote, which that's not a good look for the National.
Breaking, that is fake news right there. The Georgia Straight had a similar boneheaded moment where they posted a piece congratulating Tony Harris on his victory. Land speculator and rich guy's son, Tony Harris, I believe, was basically the lead of that story.
Yeah, I mean, the Georgia Straight one was almost more understandable. They clearly had two stories written and hit published at the same time for both of them too soon. Yeah. But this is just a straight up mistake. Some producer in Toronto hopefully has at least realized what he or she has done. I'm not 100% convinced that they have.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the biggest loser of the night. The good doctor, Dr. Andrew Weaver, the Green Party. Let me just set the stage here. In 2017, Kathleen Harris, a nurse, ran for the Green Party. Unknown candidate, did not get the same kind of attention that certainly Andrew Weaver and his little mini caucus poured into Nanaimo this time. She picked up 1 out of 5 votes, 20% of the vote. Yeah.
Very credible showing.
Very credible showing. In this campaign, they lost 12.5 of those points. 8 went to the Liberals, 2.5 went to the NDP, and 2 went to the Conservatives. she fell from 20. This better candidate, I would say, Michelle Ney, certainly a better known candidate, daughter of the former very popular mayor and a former Socred MLA, one of the only two guys who's ever beaten the Nanaimo curse for free enterprise.
And whose name you see throughout Nanaimo too. I mean, he is legitimately well known.
Yeah, so they fell from 20 points to 7.5, 7.4. Whatever Andrew Weaver's doing, it ain't working. So where does the good doctor go from here?
Well, at the very least, it didn't work in Nanaimo.
It didn't work in Kelowna either. You know, he was there in Kelowna several times during the Ben Stewart candidacy. They had a star candidate. He was there every weekend. He visited the riding 3 or 4 times during that 28-day period. They saw their vote cut in half there too.
Well, I mean, the Greens have kind of put themselves in a corner in that they have, because it's one thing to choose the NDP to back as a minority government, and I mean, that's fine. But there is very little they can show to their supporters, Green supporters, I mean, as something that they can claim credit for. They didn't get their way on LNG. They didn't get their way on Site C. They didn't get their way on ride hailing. They are trying to claim credit for a couple of amendments to the speculation tax, but also calling it bad public policy. I mean, at a certain point, if there are no lines in the sand to draw where you can say, look, this is the difference we made, then if you're a Green voter who likes the government, there's no reason you wouldn't just vote for the real thing. And if you're a Green voter who doesn't like the government, there's no reason you wouldn't vote for the party that's most likely to topple them.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Why would you vote for the NDP Light or NDP Junior or the farm team when you can vote for the actual thing? You know, I do think this is, my sense is NDP headquarters, once they get over the euphoria of having survived this, will look at the way the Green vote is collapsing and be a little bit concerned.
Yeah, I agree.
I think most of us agree, certainly those of us who were involved on the BC Liberal side, that there was a group of BC Liberals supporters who went and voted Green because they were tired of Christy Clark, they were tired of 16 years in government, they were trying to send a message to the BC Liberals. And they could never bring themselves to vote NDP because that's just not what they do, but they looked for a different vehicle to do it. That now, because of the hot stove, the WAC Bennett touching the stove, that is now migrating home. You know, to lose 12.5 points and 8 of them go to the Liberals and 2, which I would say is the pure protest vote, go to the Conservatives. That is not great. The NDP only picked up 2.5 points from that lost 12.5. If protest voters go back to Liberals in enough ridings, the NDP's electoral map gets awfully tough.
Yeah, and I mean it must be kind of frustrating for Green strategists, and I know some of them, and
that's an oxymoron. That's an oxymoron.
Well, it's true, but they have said this on a number of occasions: is that there is this narrative out there, and sometimes we've been guilty of it too, of suggesting that the Greens basically just hive off votes from the NDP, and it's a vote split on quote unquote the left, and their own numbers, and they have been saying this for years, say that is simply not the case. That they take more votes from the BC Liberals than they do the NDP, but in fact, more than anything else, the people that vote Green, if they don't vote Green, they don't vote at all. And so they aren't splitting votes from the NDP. I'm sure there are people who have voted NDP who did vote Green, but on the whole, that their votes are their own or BC Liberal votes. And so as they increasingly prop up an NDP government, those voters who were BC Liberal voters, I mean, it's going to be a difficult case to make for them in places like Oak Bay for them to keep voting Green.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think if you're Sonia Furstenau, you're looking awfully hard at that NDP nomination. And if you're an NDP strategist, you're having some conversations with Sonia.
Man, that is the rumor that just will not go away. And I think eventually, because you do, I am a believer that where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's an awful lot of smoke there. At a certain point, Sonia is going to have to say something publicly.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't think it's any surprise that, or secret that there's rumors of a cabinet, at least a mini cabinet shuffle in the weeks to come, probably after this session, into the summer. Sheila Malcolmson, probably doesn't step down as a MP in a very safe riding in order to, without some sort of, little nudge and wink that, down the road she'll have a bigger voice at the table. Claire Trevina has been a horrible underperformer. You could swap out one island MLA, female island MLA for another. The math works great. But you do wonder if that's also the opportunity to reach out to Sonia Furstenau and say, hey, Sonia, like, come across.
Yeah, what do you want?
Yeah.
There's room in cabinet.
Yeah.
It's not impossible at all, and it's when you watch the legislature, you don't get a sense that Sonia, particularly enjoys the day-to-day cut and thrust and grind of the legislature, which is, I mean, if you're not here, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of reading and sitting and studying, and you can be good at it and not enjoy it, and my sense is that she doesn't particularly enjoy it. That's not a comment on her competence. I mean, not everyone finds they enjoy the drudgery of reading piles of briefing reports. I don't blame her, but being a backbench MLA in a third party is a lot of work and not a lot of glory.
Yeah, I remember right before Christmas or right after Christmas, Weaver said that he was going to pull Greens off certain committees because there's only 3 of them, and they essentially have a seat on every committee in the House, in the Ledge, but they just can't spread themselves so thin. And I wonder if that's part of trying to reduce Sonia's workload because she's sits on. In fact, I think it was her who came off the first committee, which was the one to select a new human rights commissioner or something.
I believe so, yeah. And I mean, and the thing is, Weaver's not wrong. No. The part of being an official party is that, you have to do things like sit on committees. And there is this perception out there that this place sits idle when the House isn't sitting. That's not true at all. There's a committee sitting right now. So like the work
as we speak,
continues.
There are committees sitting. There are crosses burning on the front lawns in Prince George. There are committees sitting in Victoria. As we speak.
It's true. And so, I mean, if you're a party of only 3 MLAs, you are in fact spreading yourself very thin. And so, I mean, I don't always envy the position they've put themselves in, both politically and here in the House.
Yeah, I thought Norm Spector was, pretty strong on pointing out the flaws in the Green strategy. Of course, he was there during the CASA negotiations as a hired gun by the Greens, and I think he provided some, if I'm reading between the lines, strategic advice that the good doctor didn't take. But apparently Martin Brown, no fan of the Liberals, was like just shredded the Greens. And look, we're coming now, I think you and I would agree, we're headed to a full term here, 2021 fall election. Mainly because the Greens need the provincial money to flow in. They can't raise $50,000. Like, they've got to get the provincial tax dollars in year after year. And, there's no value for them to pull the plug now. Why would they go to the polls just to, see themselves drop in ridings from 20 points to 12 to 7.5?
Well, and Weaver is one of the class of 2013, which the only reason I bring that up, and I'm sure he would not like me bringing this up, but as someone who was elected in the 2013 election, come, I believe, the end of May or beginning of June of this year, around the corner, he's eligible for a legislator pension. It's not a small amount of money. I wouldn't blame him if that figured into his decision making. But after that, it's the only person who could bring down the government, barring some unforeseen scandal or something like that. But from here till the next election in 2021, the only one who can do something about it is Andrew Weaver. And if he decides that, for all the reasons we discussed earlier today, that he has to do something to differentiate himself from the NDP. Bringing down the government would not be a terrible way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I were Andrew Weaver, first thing I do is I would bring in day one of the new session, first chance I had, a ride-hailing piece of legislation. One that, flips the middle finger to the NDP and they're cozying up with the tax industry. One that forces the Liberals to vote and support a green piece of legislation. And the problem
Which I believe they would do on ride-hailing.
I think they would too. I think they would, because I think they want to clear the decks of that before the next election. And I think they would enjoy, I think they would enjoy saying, we helped bring in something the NDP didn't. To me, that is a great issue for them. It's one that they have the moral high ground on because they've been correct the entire way through, but they've never delivered because, well, frankly, the disdain for the BC Liberals, all this nonsense that they need to be put in the penalty box for as long as possible. It's completely soured and colored Weaver on, doing what he should have been doing from the beginning, which is, bringing forward green policies and finding one party or the other who would be willing to support them and getting it through, and looking like he was the jockey on the horse instead of the tail.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. If I'm Andrew Weaver, the best selling point you have come 2021 is to portray yourself as the adult in the room. While the squabbling BC Liberals and NDP can't even be in the same room to produce good public policy, look what we've done. We produced our own ride-hailing legislation, and we worked with both sides to bring it in, and things like that. But that hasn't happened yet.
No, and I'm not sure bluntly, I'm not sure his ego would allow it to happen. I think there's a lot of water under that bridge. Of course, I point out, how's your ego going to handle it when you're back to a single seat, maybe less, in the next election, which is kind of where the Greens are cruising. But the problem, again, with the Greens is they don't have strategists. Like, they don't have people who look at this. You know, they don't have evil geniuses hidden behind the scenes in the boiler rooms of the legislature, crunching the numbers going, you know, holy crap, boss, we have a problem.
Yeah, it's funny in that I not to keep pointing to my own column from yesterday, which you should read, readers, not you, Jordan. That the BC Greens are the largest, most influential, and most successful Green Party in the history of this continent, and that is no small accomplishment. And yet, there is this sense that they're in really big trouble, and that's not a contradiction because I believe both things are true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no,
they don't have They have 3 seats. Not one of them could be seen as remotely safe.
No, you're exactly right, and I think they could be a political footnote after this next election unless they do something radical. So when things aren't working for you, you got to change them, and it'll be interesting to see if in this session Andrew Weaver can pivot a little bit. If I were him, I wouldn't renew CASA. I'd say, look, we're going to take it issue by issue from here on in, and if the Liberals come up with a good idea that's better than your idea, Mr. Premier, we're going to support them on it. And if you declare it a confidence bill, that's on you.
What's the downside in making the NDP sweat? I don't see it from a strategic point of view alone. It's the one with the speculation tax where Weaver said, well, we had to vote for it. It was a confidence bill, and everyone kind of looked at each other like, it was? No, it wasn't. And they said, well, they told us they would make it a confidence bill. That's not the same thing.
Force them to make it a confidence bill.
Yeah.
You really think they want to hang their whole political future on the speculation tax?
I'm willing to believe they told him that as a ploy, and I'm also willing to believe that they couldn't believe it worked.
What, you're saying that they would tell me something that's not true? Oh, politicians? I can't believe it. That's a terrible thing. All right, we got to talk one more thing, and that's the Main Street research polling. Main Street comes in a week ago and somehow claims that the BC Liberals have a 13-point lead in Nanaimo. They get laughed out of the mainstream media. In fact, CBC's excellent pollcaster, Eric Grenier, basically issues a memo to CBC saying, do not report this, it's a sham poll. And it was, they only interviewed 20 people. They had a sample size of 750 in Nanaimo. They only interviewed 20 people between the ages of 18 to 34, and then somehow extrapolated that out to be a huge chunk of the actual voting group. Main Street, how do you take anything they say seriously again?
Oh, I mean, it's one thing to have one big mistake like that, but this is still kind of on the heels of the Calgary mayoral election poll where they had that completely wrong as well. It's look, here's the thing: polling can sometimes get a bad rap, but I mean, when you have an inexcusably small sample size of a huge voting demographic, like people who aren't seniors, and then decide that your 20 people are somehow representative, I mean,
well, and they were so crazy, like of those 20, I think something like 12 supported the BC Liberals. Well, you and I know that the BC Liberals are not picking up 50% plus of 18 to 34-year-olds. It's never there isn't a right-wing party in the world that gets that, let alone in BC. That should have been the red flag. Like, holy guys, we can't go forward with this poll until we, get more 18 to 34-year-olds.
Well, and I mean, even the BC Liberals, I think it was Emil Scheffel on Twitter said something to the effect of, "I don't believe this for a second."
No,
it wasn't even, "Oh, that's nice to hear." It was just like, "No, this is crap."
No, we had our poll done by One Persuasion. I think there was an Angus Reid one that showed essentially the same thing. Those were, I think, proven right. The spending scandal dragged down the Liberal vote slightly, but that's probably what happened.
I mean, someone was talking to me about this morning via text about our poll, and I said essentially what you and I are saying now. Like, look, ours was done 2 weeks before polling date. No one is suggesting that people make up their minds then and don't change it. It did happen before the Plecas report, and I also firmly believe that polls influence voters' final decision, especially people who are on the fence whether to vote or not. I absolutely believe that there are NDP voters or people who lean NDP in Nanaimo who see polls saying it's going to be a close race, and they vote, and maybe they wouldn't have. I mean, of course that happens.
Yeah, no, people are looking for that sort of thing. So, where do we go from here? Next big thing on the calendar, I guess, is Friday. We have James and Lenz apparently responding.
Although they just extended the deadline just as we were going to air, actually. To give them more time. Yes, Lamsey issued a press release, which I didn't even read. I just saw the Twitter summary as I was turning on the computer. But it may not be Friday.
Okay, that's interesting. I kind of heard through the grapevine that one of them was ready, the other one was not. So
that's probably true.
They're probably going to leave it. Chances are they'll want to get it out next week, though, before the throne speech on the 12th. I would think. I can't imagine they want to let it go too long.
The extension will not be weeks or months. It's like they just weren't ready for Friday, and there's no reason to rush this. If they need an extra 48 hours, there's no reason to adhere to an artificial deadline.
Yeah, so we're about a week and a half from the throne speech. We're about 2.5 weeks from budget day. Any rumblings, new taxes, anything? Like, it's been very quiet.
Honestly, this is going to disappoint you, but honestly, no.
It does not disappoint me. I've had enough new taxes to last a lifetime.
Well, I think that's what it is. Is that, I mean, like we mentioned, for example, the premier and most of his team has been up in Nanaimo every weekend. I mean, there's no one here to hear rumblings from.
Right.
People have been so preoccupied with the Plecas report, with the Nanaimo by-election, and I think they're going to continue to some extent to be preoccupied with trying to get Jagmeet Singh either elected or not elected, depending on your point of view, in Burnaby South. And so, I mean, I have heard absolutely nothing about the budget and throne.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Usually they float some little trial balloons. I guess the throne speech will give us a little hint, maybe. But it's entirely possible they've eaten up all their tax space. Like, they not only raised all the taxes they promised they were going to raise, they found billions more to increase. So it could just be they're worried about a recession like the rest of us and don't want to go any further.
Well, and I also think that you will gag on the first part of the sentence, but the NDP are smart, and they realized they had a minority government. And, I mean, they introduced a lot of legislation in the first couple sessions, and that part of that was that they couldn't be certain how much time they had. No minority government can. And so I think it's entirely possible that they kind of front-loaded their agenda and that more than half of what they want to do has been done. A lot of it was either rushed or bad, I agree with you, but I don't think we're going to see the same frantic pace from here till 2021.
I'll disagree. I think the spring's going to be jam-packed again, and then I guess we'll see in the fall. I don't know. I think they feel like they're here for a good time, not a long time.
Well, we'll see. I think at first now they'll be a lot more confident. It's true now that they have Sheila in there and a reasonably solid majority. I guess the only thing that could happen now is that recall campaign in Abbotsford, which I also have not heard anything about.
No, I think that's DOA unless Lenz and James have some sort of gobsmacking revelations, which it's BC politics. You can't put it past them. You never know.
Never expect anything but the unexpected.
And that's why we have the BC Poly Hot Stove to help you figure all that out. This was like a Jody Vance-like answer here. That was a BC Poly Hot Stove to sort everything out. You can follow us on Twitter at TheOrcaBC. He's at Maclean K. I'm at Jordan Bateman. And Facebook.com/TheOrcaBC. We're on YouTube, building our little subscriber base there. Go to iTunes, search for The Orca for audio versions of this, all the Off the Cuffs, all the Unspun. I've really been enjoying the Unspun podcast, the Jody George show.
It's a different voice and a different take, and man, they are very good at what they do.
Yeah, they're very polished, unlike us. And that is
so
Unspun. No, looking forward to theorca.ca, and just double checking my calendar. Yeah, we'll be back next week for another conversation, maybe a throne speech preview. I don't know.
I hope so. We'll have to do some digging.
Actually, you know what we should do? If Clough Lenz come out next week, we will broadcast shortly thereafter. How about that?
Yes, James and Lens.
James
Clough
and Lens
comes out all the time.
Clough. Oh yeah, Clough and Lens. Oh yeah, Rick. I can tell you, Rick has not ever had any problems. He's never forced no expense issues with Rick Clough. The guy begged
Doesn't
me
even
to.
wear a watch.
The guy yesterday was begging me. He was in for tapings. He was begging me to let him buy me lunch, and I'm like, no, Rick, come on, you're a CBC radio legend. I'll buy you lunch. It's fine.
He seems like a brown bag kind of guy.
He is incredibly low maintenance, Rick Clough. So you gotta love him. All right, so ICBA.ca, that's our website. TheOrca.ca, that's the Orca's website, and we'll talk to you all again soon.